Hi, students. Welcome to the Cells of Energy podcast. This is one of my favorite units because we get to talk about food and water and breathing, and those are all things that I really enjoy, especially the food part. And so we'll start with talking about the two classifications of living organisms. Um, you're either considered an autotroph or a heterotroph, and based on what you're classified as, you're going to do a particular process to convert your energy or to gain energy. And so the autotrophs are a special kind of group, and we're not talking about the humans here. We're talking about the organisms that obtain the energy from sunlight or chemicals. You might have uh, previously heard of them as the producers, and the plants, some bacteria, and some protists. These are the producers. Here's a good picture of what the producers are. They get their energy from the sun. They're the bottom of the food chain. Okay, these are right there, the bottom, the plants, the ones that will convert sun energy into chemical energy known as glucose. And what we're talking about here is strictly an energy transfer. We're not making energy, we're just transferring energy. All energy on this planet comes from the sun. And so the purpose of the producers or the autotrophs is to convert that sunlight, that sun energy, that light energy into a chemical form, which we can then consume and then convert into a more usable form of energy in our bodies called ATP, which we'll get to in a different lesson. Today is all about the producers, the autotrophs, and this process known as photosynthesis that really starts the energy conversion process. So in your note sheet, you're going to see a note sheet that looks like this. And as we go through, I'm going to ask that you write down the information on the right-hand side. And this is sort of a hybrid Cornell note system. You write down the information on the right side, and then when we stop, you'll spend a minute or two coming up with your own review question that would be answered with the information that you wrote here. Now, if we look at this first term, um, the word autotroph, and hold on, let me get a duplicate up here so I can now write on the screen. Oh, there we go, a little bigger. Um, you look at the word autotroph, and a good definition that we can write, a good definition that we saw in one of the slides, that these are the organisms, you just write it my way, organisms that convert sunlight into chemical energy. So go ahead and write that in your notes. And if you would take a second before we even move on, if you had to write a particular review question about what the term autotroph is, what would you write in the left-hand column? What are you going to write? What are you going to write right here? Take a second and write your question. Do you have your question? So if we look at the word photosynthesis, this is the actual process that converts sunlight into chemical energy. I want to take a look at several different definitions before we write this down. So we look at the word photosynthesis. Producers convert light energy into chemical energy. That's one way of saying it. You can also say hold on a second, let me flip to this slide. Plants use the sun's energy to combine hydrogen or water from the soil and carbon dioxide from the air to make glucose. That's another way to put it. Oxygen is the waste product, right? What I would prefer, because there's so many things you could put, What I would prefer that you have as a definition is the first word is a process. Photosynthesis is a chemical process, right? A process that converts light energy into glucose or chemical energy. And so when you look at photosynthesis, okay, as we've talked about in class, and I know everyone knows how photosynthesis works because it's as simple as if I gave every one of you a plant. You see this plant right here? Let's say I gave this to you and I said, your sole grade in the class is to make this grow. Do you think you could do it? I bet you could, because you all know what it takes to make a plant grow, right? You need sunlight. Plants aren't grown without sun. Either you put it by a windowsill or you put it outside. Plants aren't grown without sun. You got to have water. You got to water your plants. And the third ingredient, the most confusing ingredient, because we often get the gases mixed up, is carbon dioxide that come from, well, let's say that the consumers, people like us. So three main ingredients: sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. This chlorophyll is a plant organelle in the leaves that are going to collect the sunlight, but you need sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water in order for the plant to actually convert that sunlight into the glucose. Right, three things. And as I said, if I were to give you a plant and your grade was based on making this plant grow, I bet you all could do it. And because you all can do it, I know that you know the order of photosynthesis. It really is that basic. So if we take a look at our notes here, and before we move on, I'd like you to take a second and write the question. Take a second and look at this definition for photosynthesis. And what kind of question could you ask yourself that would be answered in the information to the right? Challenge yourself here. It doesn't just have to be, what is photosynthesis? Maybe it could be, what does photosynthesis do? You had a question. Think about how you would remember that. If we move on to plants, what plants need? Again, if I gave you a plant, what would just think to yourself, what plant need in order to convert the sunlight? So think about that. Think about what plants need. You know most of the answer to the questions. Plants need water. Plants aren't growing without water. Plants aren't growing without sunlight. They need sunlight or light energy. It doesn't have to be the sunlight. You can make artificial light. People have grow lamps all the time. I have a grow lamp in my basement where I grow plants. And the last one, you need air. And more specifically, it's the carbon dioxide that comes out of our mouths that plants need. So if you see someone talking to their plant, be nice to the plant, it's okay. They're not crazy. They're just being nice to the plant because they know that carbon dioxide is needed to make the plant grow. So again, before we move on, because it is important that you're going to have to understand the equation, think about what question you could write on this side of the paper. Just take a minute and think. So when I come back through and check your notes, I'm going to expect that you have these questions on the left-hand side. A really important piece of getting the notes done. The next thing is the equation. If I'm going too fast, just pause the podcast and wait until you're ready to move on. If you look at the equation, you're going to put all of these needs, and put it in more of a mathematical equation with the products to sort of make sense of what's reacting together to produce our glucose in the end. So if you look, you need water, you need carbon dioxide. So we're just writing the mathematical equation. Okay. I'm going to write an arrow here and just write light energy. Use sunlight. Sometimes you'll see it as sunlight. And in the end, you're going to get C6H12O6. And all that is glucose. A chemical formula for glucose. And also what plants give off, which we bring in, is the oxygen. Right here. Now, in some instances, you're going to notice that there's all these big numbers in front, and that's just to balance the equation. When you get into chemistry, that'll make a little more sense. So you might see, 6H2O and 6 carbon dioxide and 6 oxygens over here. And that's just to balance the chemicals or the elements and compounds, because in chemistry, however many hydrogens you have on the left side of the equation has to equal the amount of hydrogens on the right side of the equation. So we don't really worry too much about that in biology, but if you ever see these numbers, like the sixes in front of the waters or carbon dioxide, just know that that's more of a chemistry thing. It is important to note, but we don't really get carried away with all that in biology. So with the equation here, again, write yourself a question. What's the equation for photosynthesis? Pretty basic question. And if you notice, again, because this is one of the main points of photosynthesis, we take a look at the equation here. Light energy, water, carbon dioxide gives you oxygen and glucose. Right? This conversion all happens in the chloroplasts. Chlorophyll absorb energy, and we move on to the split water. Carbon dioxide bonds with the hydrogens there to make our glucose. We're going to go through this whole process in a bit. I'm going to end the show here and see if I think I have a good equation for you at the end. Yes, I do. All right. So you have two reactions that take place in photosynthesis, the light-dependent reactions. These, water gets split, and what's left over is oxygen. That's what we breathe in. And then you have light-dependent, independent reactions where you're adding hydrogens right here to the carbon dioxides to get your glucose. So we'll take a look at that in just a minute. So in your notes here, I'm going to scroll back. The last two parts of this. Some basic information that you need to know about photosynthesis. Right, two structures, chloroplast and chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, or chloroplast, is the organelle where photosynthesis takes place. Looks like a bunch of flattened pancakes, right? Looks a lot like that's what chlorophyll looks like. These big discs that are within the leaf. Okay. Now within the chloroplast you have chlorophyll and other pigments, but chlorophyll is just a pigment. It's a pigment that absorbs light. And this is why plants are green. They reflect all green light rays, and they absorb everything else, and this is what gets the ball rolling. Right? You have the chlorophyll within the chloroplast. Don't click that. Pigment that absorbs light in the chloroplast. So chlorophyll is within the chloroplast. You have lots of these pigments. They absorb the light, and that's where water is going to be split in the chloroplast. In the chloroplast, the water will be split. Oxygen goes bye-bye. That's what we breathe in. The carbons, the hydrogens from the water stay and they bond to the carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, to make our glucose and C6H12O6. So that is photosynthesis in a nutshell. Before we stop, I'm going to write your question. Where do we find chlorophyll? Where's chloroplast? Write yourself a review question. If you have any questions, please see Mr. Matthews. That concludes our podcast. So make sure you have this down. Mr. Matthews will take a look at your notes sheet in class. Make sure you have the questions all filled in. If you want to do these at the very end, that's good. That's a good way to kind of summarize what it is that we just talked about. And in class, we will go over the steps to get from here, the water and the carbon dioxide and the light, to the glucose.